For 3 years, I let my brother live in my guest house for free until he turned my generosity into his personal scam. When family loyalty turned to betrayal and the law got involved, I was forced to fight for my home, my sanity, and the truth. You won't believe how far my own brother went, or what I had to do to take my life back. Watch to the end to see how everything unraveled. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who cut deepest. When our parents died, I didn't just lose them, I inherited everything that came with their absence. The grief, the house, the responsibilities, and eventually, my little brother, Josh. He was 24 then, freshly unemployed, couch surfing, and emotionally wrecked. I was 29, working full-time in corporate HR, managing our parents' estate, and trying not to drown in my own mourning. So when he asked if he could stay in the guest house behind the main house just until he figured things out, I didn't hesitate. It was supposed to be 6 months. A soft landing while he got his feet under him. The guest house was fully furnished, a charming little one-bedroom unit with a kitchenette and separate entrance. Our dad built it years ago as a hobby, maybe even with the idea of one day retiring into it. I'd kept it tidy out of nostalgia. Letting Josh live there felt like honoring both my parents and him. He moved in with just a duffel bag and a PlayStation. I stocked the fridge. Gave him my spare Wi-Fi password. Paid the water and electricity without complaint. We shared groceries more often than not. I figured he'd repay me when he could. That first year, I chalked things up to grief. He slept until noon. He missed job interviews. He blew through 2 part-time gigs and blamed the managers. I excused it. We were both hurting. By the second year, excuses started feeling thin. He began treating the entire backyard as his domain, blasting music, hosting poker nights, having friends over at all hours. Once, I came home to find a group of strangers splashing in the pool while he grilled burgers using my propane. They barely acknowledged me. I told myself to talk to him, but every time I tried, he'd brush me off with, "Relax, Em. It's just for now. I'm working on some things." By year 3, just for now had calcified into something uglier. He never offered rent. Never thanked me. And something in his attitude shifted, like he'd rewritten the story in his head and now believed this setup was somehow his right. The tipping point came one random Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry when someone rang my front doorbell. I opened it to a middle-aged couple in hiking gear, holding rolling suitcases. "Hi. We're here for the Airbnb," the man said brightly. "The guest house?" I blinked. "What Airbnb?" They looked at each other, confused. The woman pulled out her phone and showed me a listing, my backyard guest house. Photos, pricing, glowing reviews. Host name, Josh. My stomach dropped. I told them there was a mistake, that it wasn't a rental, and I had no idea they were coming. They apologized and left, but not before asking if they'd get a refund. I stood there on the porch, cold laundry in my hands, wondering how the hell I had let it get this far. That night, I waited for Josh to come home. He strolled in around midnight, reeking of weed and beer, laughing into his phone. I asked him to step into the main house. "You've been Airbnb-ing the guest house?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He shrugged. "Just a few weekends here and there. It's no big deal." "No big deal?" I repeated, stunned. "People I don't know are showing up at my door asking for a key to my property." Josh rolled his eyes. "It's not just your property." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" He looked me in the eye and said flatly, "I've lived here long enough to have rights, Emma. You can't just kick me out. I've established tenancy." And just like that, the brother I once coddled like a child let me know he wasn't going anywhere. I didn't sleep that night. Josh's words echoed in my head like a siren I couldn't turn off. "You can't just kick me out. Established tenancy? Since when did helping my brother not become a favor, but a legal liability?" The next morning, I called a friend from work. She used to do paralegal work before moving into HR. I explained the situation in a whisper, pacing my kitchen like the floor was on fire. "Don't do anything rash," she warned. If he's gotten mail delivered there, if he's paid utilities, anything, yeah, he might have some rights depending on your state. Talk to a lawyer before you say another word to him. That scared me more than I'd like to admit. When I checked the mailbox at the side gate, the one connected to the guest house, my heart sank. Credit card offers. Bank statements. Even a couple of IRS letters. All addressed to Josh. He'd been planning this. I started noticing everything differently after that. The backyard, once my sanctuary, now looked like a war zone. Cigarette butts near the pool, discarded beer cans under the porch, tire tracks in the grass from his friends' cars. One of them even parked halfway on my front lawn, tearing up the sod. When I said something to Josh, he just muttered, "Not my car," and walked off. I'd always thought of him as careless, but now I saw something nastier under the surface: entitlement. Then came the day I found a printed will in his open backpack, sitting on a bar stool in his kitchen. I don't make a habit of snooping, but I was delivering a package that had been dropped at my door by mistake. The paper caught my eye, the header looked familiar. It was a copy of our father's will. But something about it felt off. I grabbed my own original from the fireproof box inside the main house. Line by line, they matched until they didn't. Josh's version included a paragraph I had never seen before, one that left the guest house and surrounding property to him. My chest went tight. It was obviously fake, the font didn't match, the wording was clumsy, and my dad's signature looked scanned. I took a photo of it before leaving it exactly where I found it. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I visited our Aunt Carol. She was one of the only relatives still living nearby, and I hoped she could talk some sense into him. But when I brought it up, she cut me off. "Emma, he's your brother. He's struggling. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" "Aunt Carol, he's Airbnb my house behind my back." She waved her hand like I was being dramatic. "You've always had it together. He hasn't. Let him have this." That crushed me more than I expected. Carol used to babysit us, bake us cookies every Sunday. I thought if anyone would be on my side, it'd be her. But Josh had gotten to her first. Soon, cousins I hadn't heard from in months started texting me with the same undertone: "He's family. Why are you being so harsh? You inherited the house, why can't he have the back unit?" I wanted to scream. No one cared that I'd paid every bill, mowed the lawn, replaced the roof, or that I'd kept our parents' place standing while Josh floated through life like a lost balloon. But I didn't scream. I got quiet. I started keeping records. It started with screenshots, Airbnb listings, calendar bookings, reviews. I took photos of every piece of mail addressed to Josh. I logged the dates, saved security cam footage from my doorbell app, and downloaded every message he'd sent me that hinted at his space or his property. I even printed out Venmo transactions where I'd covered his groceries, utility overages, and the time he asked me to spot him rent for a friend crashing short-term. That friend turned out to be a paying guest. I wasn't collecting evidence. I was building a case. But the real turning point came 2 weeks later, when Josh escalated things further. I got a notice in the mail from the county recorder's office, a legal challenge regarding our father's will and property transfer. Josh had filed a formal claim asserting partial ownership of the land, citing a recently discovered copy of our father's will. The forged version. My hands shook as I read it. He'd submitted the same fake document I saw in his guest house. And he didn't just stop there, he claimed I was unfairly withholding inheritance and accused me of fraud. I wanted to cry. Instead, I booked a meeting with a real estate attorney the next morning. Her name was Marissa, sharp as a knife, calm as still water. I laid it all out: the Airbnb, the mail, the fake will, the claim, the texts, the family pressure. She didn't flinch. "This is ugly," she said, flipping through my printouts. "But it's not unbeatable. What do I do?" I asked, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "You don't do anything." "I do. You keep your cool. You don't warn him. Don't talk to him about this. Let him think he's winning. It was both terrifying and relieving. Marissa filed a fraud report with the probate court challenging the forged will and submitted a cease and desist for the Airbnb rentals, citing zoning violations and lack of permits. She also contacted the city housing board to report illegal short-term rentals, which came with their own set of fines. But the masterstroke? She compiled everything: the Airbnb income, fake will, unpaid taxes, zoning violations, and handed it to the IRS. Josh had never reported a cent of his Airbnb side hustle. No taxes. No licensing. Nothing. And because it was all done under my property, the liability was starting to point toward me until I drew that hard legal line. We had evidence. Surveillance clips showing unknown people entering and exiting the guest house with luggage. Emails from guests asking questions. Even a digital fingerprint of the forged will Josh had edited on his own laptop, which he once let me borrow, not realizing I'd later recover deleted documents with timestamps. The next week, Josh was served with formal eviction papers and notified of pending legal action. I was inside the main house, watching through the blinds, when he opened the envelope. His face dropped. Then twisted in rage. He didn't knock on my door. Instead, he stormed back into the guest house and slammed the door so hard my kitchen windows rattled. He still thought he had time. That the system would protect him. That family loyalty would save him. He had no idea how thoroughly I documented the damage. And I was just getting started. Josh went into PR mode for himself. The next week, I saw his social media light up with passive-aggressive posts. Stuff like, "Crazy what people will do for money. Blood doesn't mean anything anymore." Or being stabbed in the back by your own sister? Classy. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But our relatives sure did. I got 3 phone calls the following day. Aunt Carol again, then our cousin Tessa, and finally my dad's brother, Uncle Ray, who hadn't spoken to me in over a year. Each one had the same script: "This is family. Why are you involving the courts?" I realized then that Josh was feeding them a narrative, one where he was the struggling younger sibling, unfairly evicted by a cold-hearted sister who got everything when our parents died. And maybe, to them, that sounded plausible. What didn't fit in their version was the truth: that Josh had forged legal documents. That he was renting property he didn't own. That he'd taken my kindness and warped it into leverage. I stayed silent publicly. But privately, Marissa moved quickly. She filed for a temporary restraining order, not the dramatic kind, but one that blocked Josh from making any claims on the property until the matter was resolved. The court granted it. Next came the cease and desist letter from the city. Josh had 10 days to take down the Airbnb listings or face fines. When he ignored it, the city levied the first penalty, a $3,000 citation. And that wasn't the only bill coming. The IRS had opened a case. They requested banking information, payment records, and back taxes on the undeclared income. Marissa said if they found over $10,000 in earnings, which the Airbnb data showed he clearly had, he could face serious penalties or worse. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. But Josh wasn't taking it quietly. He slipped a handwritten note under my front door. It read, "You're really doing this? Over a backyard guest house? Over nothing? Hope it's worth losing your only brother." I stared at it for a long time. Was it worth it? 3 years ago, I'd have said no. I would have bent backward to keep peace. To keep Josh in my life. I would have ignored the parties, the mess, the money. But I had bent. Over and over. Until I was standing in the ruins of my own home life, letting someone else take advantage of the one thing I'd worked so hard to preserve: our family legacy. This wasn't about a backyard guest house. It was about the lie that family can do anything to you and you should still take it. The night before the court hearing, I sat at the dining table with every piece of evidence spread in neat little stacks. Receipts. Photos. Emails. Legal filings. I looked at the clock, 11:48 p.m. Josh was still awake. Music thumped faintly through the shared yard. I almost stood up. Almost walked out back one last time to give him a chance to undo it. To say sorry. To fix it before it became permanent. But then I thought of the forged will. Of the guests he charged rent to. Of the people he turned against me. Of the smug look on his face when he said, "You can't kick me out." I stayed seated. Tomorrow, I'd let the judge handle it. Court was at 9 a.m. sharp. Josh arrived at 9:12. He walked in like he was the one suing me, clean button-down, smug expression, a manila folder tucked under his arm like he had evidence that would blow the roof off the place. He didn't even look at me. Marissa leaned in. He brought documents. Bet you $5 it's the forged will again. I didn't smile. I was too focused. Too numb. The courtroom was quiet, nearly empty. Just us, our attorneys, and a sleepy clerk tapping at a keyboard. The judge, a serious man with a dry voice and sharp eyes, reviewed both sides in silence for several minutes. When he finally spoke, it was to Josh's lawyer. "Mr. Dawson, you're asserting partial ownership of the property based on a will submitted to the probate court last month. Is that correct?" Josh's lawyer stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client came into possession of a revised copy of the late Mr. Kendall's will, one which was previously unknown to the family." "Previously unknown," the judge repeated, "and conveniently left solely in the possession of your client?" I felt Marissa shift beside me, just slightly. She smelled blood. Then came our turn. Marissa stood and methodically laid out everything, the original will filed years ago, notarized and uncontested. Then she presented a forensic report showing that the so-called revised version had been edited on Josh's own laptop, using a scanned signature cut from the original. She walked the judge through a timeline of Airbnb listings, payment records, city zoning violations, and even highlighted the fine already issued by the housing department. When she mentioned the pending investigation by the IRS for tax evasion, Josh flinched. But the worst was still coming. Marissa hit play on the court screen footage from my doorbell cam. A stream of different guests arriving at the guest house with luggage. Dates and timestamps. One after another. One guest even clearly says, "We booked it through Airbnb." Josh's face slowly melted. He wasn't cocky anymore. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson, would you like to explain how you are operating a commercial rental business on property that, by your own admission, you do not legally own?" His lawyer stammered. Josh said nothing. Then the judge spoke words I will never forget. "Not only do I find no legal merit to your claim of ownership, but the evidence presented shows clear intent to defraud both the court and the property owner. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for further review." Josh's head snapped toward me. His mouth opened slightly, like he was about to say something, maybe beg, maybe lash out. But he didn't. He just slumped back in his seat. The eviction order was granted effective immediately. He had 14 days to vacate or face removal by the sheriff's office. As we left the courtroom, I felt light for the first time in years. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even relief. It was clarity. I had given Josh years of my life. My home. My patience. My trust. And all he gave back was betrayal. Outside, Marissa finally cracked a smile. That went about as well as it could have. I nodded, still stunned. I can't believe he really thought he could get away with it. Marissa glanced at her watch. Believe it. And now he gets to deal with the fallout. The aftermath wasn't clean. Josh didn't just pack up and vanish after court. The next 2 weeks were tense beyond belief. He didn't speak to me, just stomped around the backyard, slamming doors and glaring whenever our paths crossed. His friends stopped coming by. Cars disappeared from my lawn. Even the pool was silent. Every day, I wondered if he'd finally go, or if I'd have to call the sheriff to drag him out. But Josh must have realized the walls were closing in. City officials visited twice about the illegal rentals. He got a certified letter from the IRS, and from what I overheard through the window one night, he was on the phone with someone in full-blown panic about back taxes and criminal liability. That was the first time I actually felt a twinge of pity for him. Then I remembered the forged will, the months of manipulation, and let it pass. Packing his things, Josh left the guest house in worse shape than he found it: beer cans in the closet, trash in the drawers, even a hole punched in one wall. But he was gone before the deadline, leaving his key in my mailbox, no note, no apology. After everything, it was almost anticlimactic. A week later, the district attorney's office contacted me to confirm the complaint against Josh for fraud. The city sent me a letter showing he'd been fined thousands for zoning violations. The IRS case was still pending, but Marissa said if he was smart, he'd cut a deal before they pressed criminal charges. Meanwhile, Airbnb guests began reaching out. It turned out some of them hadn't just been inconvenienced, they'd been scammed. Josh had canceled bookings last minute, refused refunds, even locked people out. I got looped into a class action suit some of them filed, but my records and the city's documentation cleared me entirely. Josh would have to deal with them too. As the house finally settled, the silence was unfamiliar. No more thudding music or voices drifting from the yard. For the first time in 3 years, I walked barefoot across my own kitchen, windows open, breathing deeply. Aunt Carol and the cousins? Their calls dried up overnight. When I texted Carol a simple update, the judge ruled in my favor. I'm safe. Josh is gone. All she sent back was, okay. The family group chat grew cold. It hurt, but in a way, the worst part was behind me. I realized I'd spent so long being the good daughter, the good sister, I never once set a real boundary for myself. I thought loving family meant absorbing their chaos, letting them take and take. Now, for the first time, I wasn't just the person left holding the pieces. I was building something of my own. That night, I walked out to the empty guest house, flicked on the light, and looked around at the mess. The damage was ugly, but fixable. The space was mine again, and I could feel deep in my bones something new settling in: resolve. I was done letting anyone make me feel guilty for protecting my own life. I didn't rush to renovate the guest house. For a week, I just let it sit empty, breathing in the quiet, watching the sunlight creep through the windows each morning. After 3 years of tiptoeing, it felt good to walk through the space and know it was finally, truly mine. There was a moment, standing in the middle of the empty living room, when it all hit me. The betrayal. The endless justifications. The way I'd twisted myself in knots to avoid being the bad guy in my own story. I felt anger, sure, but mostly I felt free. I wasn't angry at Josh anymore. I wasn't angry at the relatives who took his side. I was done carrying any of it. I made a plan and started fresh. First came repairs. I patched drywall, scrubbed every inch, tossed everything Josh left behind. I hired a contractor to repaint and replace fixtures. As the space transformed, so did my sense of ownership. It wasn't just a guest house anymore, it was my future. With Marissa's encouragement, I set up the business I'd dreamed about since before my parents died, a consulting firm run from home. I turned the old bedroom into a bright office, lined the walls with art, and put my name on the door. Every morning, I brewed coffee in the guesthouse kitchen, powered up my laptop, and felt the satisfaction of finally working for myself. Meanwhile, Josh's problems only grew. He pleaded out on the forgery and fraud charges, community service, probation, and a hefty restitution bill. The IRS garnished his wages. He messaged me once, months later, a short, bitter line: "Hope you're happy." I blocked his number. Aunt Carol and my cousins never apologized. The family chat stayed dead. Sometimes I missed them, but more often I realized how quiet peace could be. Over time, I found a new circle: neighbors, clients, even a few old friends who said they'd always admired how I stood my ground. For the first time, I felt understood, not as someone too generous for her own good, but as someone strong enough to protect what she'd built. 1 year after the court case, I celebrated my first big client win. I hosted a gathering, just a handful of friends, simple food, laughter filling the house and spilling out into the backyard. No drama. No chaos. Just gratitude. Sometimes I look at the guest house in my office, my sanctuary, and remember how easy it was to let love turn into obligation, and how hard it was to say, enough. But I did. And, finally, that's enough for me.